Well, hello, hello.
Hello.
We are still in the book of Job,
Yep.
and as we look at, I think there's only one more after this, but this one, kind of a short one compared to the others we've been looking at, only a couple of verses. And in Job chapter 40, verses 3 through 5, a little background before we get into these three verses. The two chapters before this, chapter 38 and 39, which, again, chapter breaks came later. It wasn't originally written that way. But the section before this is about 50 or 60 sentences that are mostly questions that God is asking Job. Perhaps you're familiar with the statement, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Or maybe, gird up your loins like a man and prepare to answer me. I will question you and you will answer me.
Yep.
That's the beginning of what in our Bibles is chapter 38. And then God just pounds Job with question after question that he knows Job can't answer.
Yep.
And so at the end of that section, then, after just being hammered with all of these questions about the things that God does that mankind can't understand, and in fact, those questions that God asks, a lot of them are kind of scientifically based type questions.
Yep.
And honestly,
a lot of them we still really
don't know the answer. Yeah, it's been maybe 3,000 to 4,000 years since Job, and scientists still don't know the answer. I mean, they may think they know some things about some of the things, but we don't know the answer.
Some of the things I know we've found specifically because of God asking Job these questions.
Yeah, people are looking
like
into
the
things.
Rivers of fresh water.
Well, that was in Psalms, but
oh, was it?
Yeah, that's in Psalms.
I thought that was something that he asks Job about. Okay.
Yeah. Like the river. The springs of fresh water in the sea kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that one was in Psalms. I don't know. I'd have to look back at all of these. I don't remember that one being in here though.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of questions about wild animals, questions about stars, and about light and darkness and how they work, and
my favorite is paraphrased. Do you know where I store the snow during the summertime?
Yeah,
that's a great one because it's like, what?
yeah. Where do I keep the snow during the summer? I think it's during our summer. He keeps it down in Antarctica.
Right.
There's a lot of it down there.
Yeah.
But yeah. So all of these questions, just question after question after question, and then at the beginning of chapter 40, at the end of just pounding him with all these questions, then the Lord said to Job, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it."
So theoretically, God will answer our questions, and He'll let us fight with Him as long as we can answer all of that.
Now, answer His questions first.
Honestly, yeah, because I think, which of course nothing similar is going to happen today, but if something like this did happen again, where you're kind of fighting with God and God shows up and He's like, "All right, I got some questions for you first," I think it would definitely be like a different set of questions.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But that's interesting, and it's crazy to think that even if we did figure out all of this stuff scientifically and tracked the animals and figured out all of it, God would be able to show back up with just as many questions about just as many different aspects of the world that we would still have no idea of.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much, right. Even with all of humanity's time on this planet, there's so much that we still have to learn and explore and figure out so many things that we think we know, and then we do more
Well,
research into it, and 10 years later it's like, oh hey, we were wrong, it's actually like
yeah,
this.
that's why they have to rewrite science books constantly,
Yep.
because
Yep.
what they thought they knew, they wound up not knowing.
Yep. And some of that is, based on studies having faulty information and bias and whatever. And some of it is just, you learn something new.
We get better at
Yeah.
figuring things out
We
sometimes.
we dig deeper, we learn more, and so we've got to rewrite something and
I think
figure
about
something else out.
even something like the atom and how it used to be drawn, and then they kept changing the way it's drawn. Okay, no, it's really like this, and then they
Yep.
no, it's really like this. And honestly, they're still not sure, particularly about how the electrons work around an atom.
Yeah.
They just really don't know for sure exactly how that works, because, in spite of the fact that we have what they call an electron microscope, nobody on Earth has ever actually seen an electron, even with the most powerful microscopes that we have. We can't actually see one. And so there are lots of theories, there are lots of, well, we see when we did this, this happened, and so it must have been, and kind of conclusions drawn from that.
Yeah, which
But we've
can
never
be,
actually seen it.
yeah, and it can be fairly solid evidence based on experiments that where
Right.
you're like, okay, this did this, this did this. Well, that can only mean this, logically speaking.
Unless, of course, we're missing something.
Yeah, unless of course there's something that we don't know. But that's always interesting to think about, and I just love that idea that God's like, okay, once you understand all the things I understand, sure, you can fight with me. I'll answer some of your questions.
Yeah.
But it's that idea that we're never really going to be able to get there.
Right.
There's always going to be something more where God's going to be like, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? No matter how much we learn about this world,
Right.
the answer to that question is always going to be a no.
We weren't there. We don't know.
Although, technically, since our souls are eternal, there's a possibility
No,
we were
our
there in
souls
some form.
were not until we began. There was no Adam, and Adam's soul didn't exist until God created him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same thing with us today. That it's not like our souls were just hanging out with him and then came to earth.
Yeah.
And that's really not even an accurate view of things. When we read what he says, when he breathed into Adam the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. It's the combination of the breath of God, the spirit, and the body together that makes a soul.
Right.
So there is no soul until the spirit and the body are combined into a soul. That's a soul.
Right.
We sometimes talk about, like
And
we treat the soul
and
like it's the spirit. They're two
can
different
often
things.
Be
Yeah.
used interchangeably.
They are
but yeah.
often used interchangeably, but they're two different things.
Yeah.
Which is why Hebrews talks about the Word of God being able to divide between soul and spirit, because they're two different things. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
So and that's interesting. But I think about what you're talking about, him asking the questions. That's what Jesus did too.
Yeah.
When they would come and they'd ask him a question, who sent you? Where are you from? Where'd you get this authority? Blah blah blah. And he said, okay, I'll answer you if you answer my question first.
Yep.
And then he'd say, hey, the baptism of John, did that come from God or from man? And you'd think that'd be a pretty easy question, but no, they couldn't even answer that one.
Yeah. That got them wrapped up in all kinds of challenges.
They didn't want to answer that one.
And I think about that strategy. That's a really lovely strategy. I think about trying it every now and then, but that's the kind of strategy where if it works, you just made whoever you're talking with even angrier than they were before.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, then you're still stuck with trying to answer the question to begin with. So.
It amazes me that Jesus did that and people just like, oh, okay, well, we can't answer your question. Because today, if I ask you a question and you try to come back, okay, well, I'll tell you if you answer me this, I'd be like, I asked you first.
Yeah.
I asked you first. Why? What makes you think you can?
But also, like, thinking about it objectively, it's like, so you asked me first. I don't have to answer you.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to get the information out of me, you got to do what I'm saying you need to
Yeah.
do. I'm the one that's got the information. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking me the question.
Right.
So that's it's interesting the way he did that so frequently, and it worked. And thinking about it aside from our societal norms, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. But it is very odd that it did work,
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
because of how our society is kind of different from theirs
Yeah.
when it comes to asking questions.
Yeah. It is. We almost feel like compelled that if somebody asks a question, we've got to answer
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly.
And why?
And it's
I don't know why.
not just that we have to answer it, but that we have to know the answer to
Right.
it, even if it's something where it's like, well, that's something that I haven't researched, I haven't learned, I know nothing about that subject, but I still have to give you an answer. Like saying no, or I don't know anything about that.
That's unacceptable.
Yeah, it's almost not allowed.
And sometimes that's more of a pride issue on our side.
Yeah.
Most people are like, oh, you don't know. I mean, okay, you don't know. That's fine. But yeah, it's interesting because talking about answering questions. One of the things when I took the Fishers of Men course and we studied about
Different kinds of questions.
of questions, but we also talked about when other people ask us questions
Yeah.
about the Bible and about how to handle that. And one of the things they actually taught us was don't answer every question. There are reasons not to answer certain questions. Somebody may have a little curiosity question, and if you answer that question and satisfy the curiosity, then they're done and they're not interested in conversation and they're not interested in studying the Bible further. They just wanted to know the answer to that little curiosity question.
Right.
Other times they're asking a gotcha question where if you answer it, pretty much whatever you say is going to make them mad. They're going to be angry about it. When you teach somebody about salvation and how somebody has to be saved, and then they ask, well, wait, so my grandparents didn't do that. Are you saying my grandparents are going to hell and they're lost? I mean, what are you going to say? Yes?
Right.
You're going to say no? I mean, the only answer is, well, let's keep studying the Bible and see what the Bible has to say about it.
Right.
Because if you start answering those questions, they start looking at you as though you're an authority on that instead of looking at the Bible as though the Bible's the authority on that.
Right.
And so we have to look to the Bible to answer these questions instead of trying to come up with answers on our own.
Right.
It's not going to work. But it's interesting what God said here about the fault finder contending with the Almighty. And all throughout, and of course we haven't been looking at the things that weren't prayers, so we haven't really looked at all of the book of Job, obviously. But Job many times keeps saying, if the Almighty were here, I would question him. I would make him answer why I'm being treated this way because I don't deserve it and blah, blah, blah. And he's just, every time he gets the chance, he's like, I'm innocent, and if my accuser would show up, I would tell him so, and I would make him explain why he's doing this. And then God does show up.
Yep.
And God says, okay, here you go. And then he ends that verse 2 with, now, let him answer. You want to argue with me? Go ahead. Give me an answer. Say what you want to say. Speak your piece.
Yep.
And that's where and to some degree people say, well, this isn't really a prayer because God's right there. Okay, but he is speaking to God.
Right.
The line between talking to God when he's in a whirlwind right there next to you versus in heaven and you can't see.
Right.
I mean, it's still he's saying this to God. In verse 3, the Job answered the Lord and said. So he's definitely, there's no question this time about who he's talking to.
This is probably we haven't seen the last couple, but this is probably going to be our clearest prayer in Job.
Except that people will say, well, wait, it's not a prayer because God's right there.
Right.
It's like somehow, if it's like people say Stephen's, when Stephen says, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Well, that's not a prayer because he was seeing Jesus at the time, and and Jesus was standing at the right hand of God, and he was seeing him. So that's not a prayer. Wait, it's not a prayer just because he could see him.
Right.
I mean, so here.
But then that brings up the question of, if any time you're talking to God is a prayer, and Jesus is God, then every single time he was,
were they praying to him
every single time he was
on
being addressed in the Gospels,
is that a prayer?
Was that a prayer?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And of course, Stephen's situation being a little different than that because he wasn't in human form standing
right
on earth. And here, God's in this whirlwind, but still, Job is seeing the whirlwind. Yep. There's no evidence that Job's actually, seeing God,
but
just the results of him being there.
I think really what determines a prayer in situations like this is, are you talking with the intention of talking to God?
Right.
Versus in the Gospels, when the apostles were just like, hey, Jesus, you're our teacher, you're our master, we understand that you're the Son of God.
Right.
But we're also not always going to be talking to you like you're the Son of God because you look like we do.
Yeah.
And so I think
then there were
that's
those
the big
few
difference.
occasions where you argue that it was a prayer of sorts, like when James and John go to him and ask him. I mean,
they're asking for something.
They're asking for, can we be on your right and left hand when you come in your glory? And so you might say, well, that one kind of is a prayer, of sorts. But yeah, the line, and we've talked about this before. The line of what is a prayer and what isn't a prayer? It can be tricky to draw that line sometimes. So,
and I think the intention behind it is a big aspect.
Yeah.
Because like, let's say an atheist just starts talking, just starts asking questions. They don't believe in God. Is that a prayer? No. Yeah. Like if
they're just asking questions of the universe.
Yeah. If you're just what is it they call it nowadays? If you're just trying to manifest, and you're just like, I want $1 million. I want $1 million. I want $1 million. Like, that's not a prayer.
Why do you have to be so sexist about it? Why can't you womanifest? Why always want to manifest?
Hey, well, maybe I'll do that tomorrow. But I just think like that's not a prayer. You're asking for something. You're putting kind of your wishes out there, but you're understanding it's not addressed to God.
It kind of springs from the name it and claim it religious type ideas where I want this blessing from God, and so I'm going to name it and I'm going to claim it and I'm going to receive it and God's going to give it to me.
Right.
And it's kind of like my dad always told the story about a woman who was buying some curtains. She said, you want to come out to my car and see my curtains that I bought for my new house? And he's like, oh, you got a new house? She said, no, but I asked God for one, so I know I'm getting it. And so she's already buying curtains for her because she's just sure she's getting a house.
Yeah.
Because she asked God for it.
Hey, faith like a mustard seed. You have your faith, and sometimes there's no telling what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But
other times God says, no.
I love that alongside that concept, people started coming up with the good old, the Lord helps those who help themselves.
Yeah.
And that idea of, hey, you can have faith and, it might happen, but it's not going to happen if you don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
God's, like, the chances of God helping you make it happen, great. The chances of God just dropping it in your lap if you're never doing anything, probably not.
Yeah. So, all right. So we come really to verse 4. This is really only two verses, is actually what Job says.
Yeah.
The rest is all lead up to it. Okay, here you go, Job. Here's your chance. You're facing your accuser. God's right there in front of you. And what do you have to say for yourself, Job? And we got a couple different ways this first phrase is translated. This one translation says, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth." The other one says, "Behold, I am vile," instead of small account. But he basically just says, I'm nobody. I'm nothing. Yeah. It's weird how boldly he was talking earlier.
Well, it's easy to talk big until God shows up.
Yeah.
Like that kind of changes everything. I mean,
it really does.
You think about even as Christians who believe in God, the way we talk and maybe more importantly, the way we act sometimes.
Right.
And then could you imagine if we were living a certain way for, however long, and then God just shows up and is like, "Hey, I got some questions for you. 2 years ago this date, why'd you do this? Why'd this happen? Why'd this happen? Do you remember this? Do you know about this? You accused me of this. What do you think about that now?"
Right.
Not even trying to pick a fight like he kind of is here with Job, but literally just asking questions.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to say anything either.
Yeah, and we won't on Judgment Day. So many people are so bold about how they're going to handle God when they face Him in judgment. And I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. No, you're not.
No.
You're going to be shaken in your boots. And Jesus tells us even every idle word is going to come into judgment. Everything we've ever done is going to be there to be relived and examined and judged and would be judged on. Every action, every thought, every word, everything. And
yeah, I'm worried about that every idle word thing because I was talking with one of my friends a little bit ago about some of the stuff that we'd talk about when I was a kid, and she quoted back some of the things that I used to say, and I was like, man, I was an idiot. Like,
well, sometimes we are.
And I know nowadays sometimes I'm still kind of an idiot, so it's just like I hope he's real nice and gentle on the every idle word thing.
Well, again, a lot of that has to do with obviously grace and mercy and forgiveness in Christ. So basically, he says, how can I answer you? What can I say? I'm just gonna cover my mouth. I'm just gonna put my hand over my mouth because nothing to say. It's just amazing the turnaround that he had, and he says, "I've spoken once, but I won't answer. Yes, twice, but I'm not going to proceed any further. I'm not. I'm go. That okay. I'm done. I got nothing else to say."
Yep.
And then God's going to challenge him some more after this prayer, even.
Yeah.
So Job had his chance to make his defense, to make his argument, to try to accuse God or lay the blame on God or try to tell why he was in the right and God was in the wrong. And then when he gets up there, he gets stage fright.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, it's pretty much.
I think this is interesting for us as humans, not even just as a prayer, but in seeing another aspect of how we handle grief and life struggles, where we'll be all bluster and we'll be God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you letting this happen? You know, all of that stuff that you see even in movies and everything. And we might even sometimes go as far as Job to say, God, I wish you were here. I'd talk to you. We need to sort things out. I'd fight you about this because this isn't right. This isn't fair. You know, all that sort of stuff. And
But would
then
we really?
what if he does show up? And that idea, as God's going through everything, what he's basically saying is, what do you know? Who are you?
Yeah.
As humans, we're only as important. We only have as much value as he gives to us because he made us. Without him looking at us and saying, you're my child, you're important.
Yeah.
What importance do we have? Even if we change this entire world, even if we revolutionize whatever field or industry that we work in, we have nothing. Our lives are pointless. It's just a breath, just a vapor, unless he decides that we're important. And even then, like with Job, he decided that Job was important. He still tested him. He still took everything away. The only reason that Job had any value to begin with was because of his faith in God, and because God returned that faith as value back into Job.
Yeah, and and on the other side of that, even if we never accomplish any great thing on earth,
Yeah.
if we, just work as a janitor or garbage collector or a waitress or waiter or something our whole lives,
Yeah.
and we don't ever change the world, we can still have just as much value if we're a child of God.
Yeah.
God gives us that value as a human being. Now, we might not have as much net worth in the bank
Right.
as the person who, does all of those amazing things and becomes a billionaire or something. We might not have that, but our worth as a human being isn't based on our value in dollars and cents that we own. And so our value has to come from the fact that God created us and created us in his image. And then, of course, following up on that, we respond to him as obedient children.
Yeah.
And we become then someone of immense value. And the little nobody that nobody even knows their name, but they're faithful to Christ and they're a child of God, is of more value in the long run than the person who revolutionizes something and doesn't believe in God.
Yeah.
Because that's where our value comes from God and from our relationship with him.
And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently outside of these little studies is, what can I do to be helpful, beneficial, impactful, whatever. And it really boils down to, what can I do to be valuable in whatever it is that I'm trying to do. And the thought as I'm looking at everything and as I'm seeing things is like Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, everything is vanity and a striving after wind. It's all pointless. It really is. And the only way for anything to have any value and for anything to actually be important is if it's anchored in God. People talk about, having a passion for work or, making money or whatever. And it's like, I have a passion for what I do. I love what I do. But I've been going into work recently and I'm just like, why am I here? What is my purpose? What value am I adding here? And having to recognize that I can add no value by myself. Everything important and everything permanent, I have to be able to get from God and then bring that into the workplace with me. And the moment I lose sight of that, I stop being important, I stop being valuable, and I stop being effective in anything that I normally would be able to do. And that's been on my mind a lot recently, and I've been really trying to work through that.
Yeah, that's kind of like the question Paul asks. What do you have that you haven't been given?
Yeah.
Nothing. I mean, it's a rhetorical question that he's asking. He's basically saying, everything that you have, you've received it.
Yep.
And that's kind of contradictory to our society. Our society has for years said, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can. I'm a self-made man. I did this. I do all these things on my own. No.
And there's that idea in capitalism where even if something was given to you freely, you work hard putting effort out into the world to be able to give back for that, whether you do it in a charitable way or if you do it in the art of a trader where, you gave me this, well, I will put in this much work. You paid me this much, I will put in this much work. And that kind of concept. But even then, you had to start from somewhere. Your parents who raised you and fed you and did so much for you, that cost a certain amount of time and money, and you're probably never going to be able to give back that amount. Which I know the Bible talks about that as, once your parents are old, take care of them because they took care of you when you couldn't. And there's that concept of give back to them. But I think most children aren't going to be taking care of their parents with the same amount of love and dedication that their parents took care of them for 18 years. Just as an example.
Yeah, it's unusual for it to be that way.
It really is. And most of the time, if something like that does happen, there's a large buildup of bitterness. Whereas, as parents, you're just like, all right, love instead of bitterness. And I think that's an interesting concept, that it can be one way and everything seems fine and normal, but the other way, that's...
It's interesting, though. I think part of the difference there, and I can see why it would happen that way, is when you start with a baby and you start to see that baby learning things and growing and becoming more mature and able to do things that they weren't able to do before and so forth, and you see the progression towards an end to that. I see that same bitterness sometimes in a parent who has a handicapped child who's never going to be able to live on their own.
Yeah.
This child is going for their whole life going to need care. Yeah. And you see sometimes that bitterness spring up in parents of children like that. And I can understand why. It's the frustration of, I'm putting all of this work in and there's no payoff. There's no results of it other than doing it again tomorrow.
Yep.
And I think that's the problem on the other end when you talk about the children taking care of the parents.
Yep.
Because as children taking care of parents when they get older or infirm, you're looking at, okay, I mean, there's an end in sight because, eventually they're going to die. But it's, with children growing up, I'm taking care of them less and less and they're doing more and more on their own. With parents getting older, I'm doing more and more and more and more for them as they get worse and worse and need more and more help. Right. And I think that's the frustration part, is just that that it's getting harder instead of easier.
Yeah.
So,
but man,
I can see where that happens. But.
We have been through some topics today. A
Well,
little
I mean,
three verses.
Jo-
We wandered everywhere else for 35
well, a
minutes.
little background and a little
Yeah.
sidetracks. And,
Yeah.
here again, what Job is saying is, I'm nobody. I realize now I don't have any right to question you.
Yeah.
I should have kept my mouth shut, and I'm going to shut up now and not say any more.
Yeah.
And that's where, we've got to get to that point with God where we finally realize, okay, I was angry, I was grieving, I was upset about the circumstances of life, and I was going to ask God all these questions, but I realized, okay, He's God.
Yep.
And He knows way better than I do what my life needs.
Yep.
And I've got to just trust Him. And I'll shut my mouth and proceed no further and just quit talking about it and quit causing a problem to God. And Job accepted that, and he got to that point. It took him a while to get there.
Yeah.
But he got there.
Yep.
And, unfortunately, some people never get there.
Yep.
But we've got to get to that point where we say, okay, that I recognize, God, you are the Almighty, you are the All-Knowing, you are the Eternal One who has been through this a billion times with a billion other people, and I've never been through it before. I'm going to trust that you're right, and you know what's going on, and I don't, and I can't see the other side. It's like,
Right.
People talk about all the time the beautiful tapestry, but if you look at the back side of it and you see all the tangled up, tied off strings and all that kind of thing on the back side, like a cross stitch pattern or something.
Right.
And God is making our lives into a beautiful tapestry by the things that He's putting us through, just like He was with Job.
Yeah.
But we don't see that sometimes.
Yeah.
And we just think it's a tangled mess.
And those moments of clarity that we have where we might be able to see that as we're going through it, those are very important and very powerful. And we need to try and have those moments of clarity more often and focus on God and ask ourselves what He's doing and why He might be doing it, even if we're not going to be able to figure out, just so that we keep our focus in that direction and remember that He has a plan, and things may hurt and things may be difficult, but he's doing what He's doing for a reason.
Yeah. So a little prayer,
But
a lot of things to
about.
a lot of things to think about, and something for hopefully to change our perspective to a little, at least shift it more toward the kind
Because
of perspective Job has here rather than the kind he had earlier in the book.
we all want to think we're the main character. We all want to think that we're important in some way or the other. And I think sometimes God sends us through difficulties similar to this, even though not this bad, of course, just for us to see it's not on us. We're not that important.
Yeah, that's the confusion we have sometimes. We read through the Bible even, and we look at, oh, well, Abraham, he's the main character here, or, Joseph, or, all these, all the different people that, this king is the... No, the Bible is God's story of God's interaction with man.
Yeah.
He is the main character.
Yeah.
All of the other all of the people are just side characters.
Yep.
And we know they're side characters because, like, you take Abraham. Everybody, who's more important in the Bible than Abraham? He's the father of the faithful, on and on.
Right.
Right? But you look at the chapters that cover his life and realize that he lived 175 years. And there are maybe 2 weeks worth of his life is described with even a little bit of detail. Not even a lot of detail in those. There's just a few days of his life are really talked about.
Yeah.
You know why? Because he's not the main character.
Yep.
If he was the
And-
main character, his life would fill the pages.
And
But
you think
it's
about
just a snippet.
you think about how important he even was when God talks to Moses on the mountain, and he is like, forget all of Abraham's children. They're causing too many problems. I'm going to destroy them all, and I'm going to start over with you because we're not doing
We're
this.
just going to start over again. Yeah.
You think about, for that to even be an idea in God's mind, how important was Abraham, really?
Abraham was just a tool that God used because he knew Abraham would do what he wanted him to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, oh, wow, that's just kind of cold then. Why is God just
Yeah.
using us as tools? Because his purpose is what's important, not
Yeah.
ours.
Because he can see everything and know everything, and he knows what's going on, and we don't.
We don't. Yeah, it's like the coach that tells the players what to do and how to do it,
Yeah.
and they don't know because they've never been in that situation before. But the coach knows how it's supposed to go
Yeah.
and tells them what to do. And if they follow the coach's, assuming the coach is a good coach and knows what he's talking about,
Yeah.
which some coaches aren't, but God knows it all, and so he's never wrong. He always knows what is the best course of action. So,
All right.
well,
We've
keep it
kept
on going.
everybody long enough. Yeah. But thank you for listening. If you were listening, if you ended the video before now, shame on you.
Well, they won't see that though.
Yeah, this is the shame on them, and
Yeah, shame on
everyone
those people that
everyone
didn't
who made it
participate.
to this point will understand that those people are terrible people, and shame on them.
Alrighty.
Thank you for being here.
We'll see y'all next time.
We'll see you. Bye.